Welcome to an incredible journey through one of America's most fascinating stories. Today, we're diving deep into the life of a man who rose from absolute poverty to become the most powerful person in America, only to face the greatest crisis in the nation's history. This is the story of Abraham Lincoln, a man who saved America by nearly destroying it first. Are you ready to discover how a poor farm boy with no formal education became the president who freed millions of enslaved people and kept the United States from falling apart forever? Grab your headphones, settle in, and let's explore this amazing tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. Chapter 1: The Boy in the Wilderness. Picture this: it's February 12, 1809, in a tiny one-room log cabin in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. The cabin is so small that you could walk from one end to the other in just 10 steps. In this humble cabin, a baby boy is born to Thomas and Nancy Lincoln. They name him Abraham, but nobody could have imagined that this little baby would grow up to change the world forever. Abraham's childhood was nothing like what you might expect from a future president. His family was dirt poor. Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father, was a farmer who struggled to make ends meet. He could barely read and write, and he expected his son to work on the farm instead of wasting time with books. But Abraham was different. Even as a young boy, he was obsessed with learning. While other kids played games, Abraham would find any book he could get his hands on and read it over and over. His stepmother, Sarah, later said that Abraham would read the same book dozens of times because books were so precious. The family moved several times during Abraham's childhood, always looking for better opportunities. When Abraham was 7, they moved to Indiana, and when he was 21, they moved to Illinois. Each move meant starting over, building a new home, and working harder just to survive. Abraham grew incredibly tall. He reached 6 feet 4 inches, which was enormous for that time period. People would stare at him on the street because he looked like a giant, but his height wasn't the only thing that made him stand out. He had an incredible memory and could tell stories that would make people laugh until their sides hurt. Even though life was hard, Abraham never gave up on his dream of learning. He would walk for miles just to borrow a book. One time, he borrowed a book about George Washington and accidentally left it outside during a rainstorm. The book was ruined, so Abraham worked for 3 whole days to pay for it. That's how much books meant to him. Chapter 2: The Struggling Young Man. When Abraham turned 22, he decided to leave home and make his own way in the world. He moved to New Salem, Illinois, with basically nothing to his name. He didn't have money, connections, or the look of someone who would become important. His clothes were too small, his hair was messy, and he walked awkwardly. But Abraham had something special: he was incredibly honest. In New Salem, he worked at a general store. One day, a customer overpaid for something and Abraham walked several miles to return the few cents. Word spread quickly about Honest Abe, and people began to trust him. Abraham also discovered he had a gift for speaking. When he told stories or gave speeches, people would gather around to listen. He could explain complicated things in simple terms that everyone could understand. Plus, his jokes were legendary. During this time, Abraham taught himself law by reading legal books borrowed from others. Remember, there were no law schools he could afford. He literally studied by candlelight every night after working all day. It took years, but he became a lawyer without ever attending formal legal education. As a young lawyer, Abraham traveled from town to town on horseback, representing people in court. He became famous for being fair and honest. Other lawyers sometimes charged extra fees or lied to win cases, but Abraham never did. He once refused to take a case because he believed his client was lying. Abraham also fell in love during this time with Anne Rutledge, and they planned to marry. But tragically, Anne became sick and died before their wedding. Abraham was heartbroken and fell into deep depression. Friends worried he might never recover from losing the love of his life. Chapter 3: Politics and Marriage. Eventually, Abraham began to heal and started thinking about politics. He believed government should help ordinary people, not just the wealthy. In 1834, he was elected to the Illinois House of Representatives at just 25 years old. Abraham's political ideas were shaped by his experiences growing up poor. He believed anyone should be able to work hard and improve their life. This idea would become central to everything he did as president. In 1842, Abraham married Mary Todd, a woman from a wealthy Kentucky family. Mary was smart, well-educated, and ambitious. She believed Abraham could become someone important, even when he doubted himself. Their marriage wasn't always easy, they both had strong personalities, but Mary pushed Abraham to aim higher. Abraham and Mary had 4 sons, Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas, nicknamed Tad. Abraham loved being a father and would play with his children even when important guests were visiting. This shocked some people because fathers were expected to be strict and distant, but Abraham believed children should be loved and encouraged. Tragedy struck when their son Edward died of illness at just 3 years old. Abraham and Mary were devastated. Abraham began questioning his religious beliefs and thinking deeply about life and death. These personal struggles made him more compassionate toward others suffering. Chapter 4: The Slavery Question. During the 1850s, the biggest issue facing America was slavery. The country was literally splitting apart over whether slavery should be allowed in new territories. Abraham had always believed slavery was wrong, but wasn't sure what to do about it. Abraham's views on slavery were shaped by his own experiences. He had worked hard his entire life and believed all people should have the right to earn money from their labor. How could it be fair for one person to own another and take all profits from their work? In 1858, Abraham decided to run for U.S. Senate against Stephen Douglas, a powerful politician who supported allowing slavery in new territories. Abraham was the underdog, Douglas was famous, wealthy, and well-connected. But Abraham had something Douglas didn't, a clear moral vision. The two men held 7 public debates across Illinois. These debates became famous because they addressed the most important question of the time: what would America become? Douglas argued each territory should decide for itself whether to allow slavery. Abraham argued slavery was morally wrong and shouldn't spread. During one debate, Abraham said something memorable: "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." These words shocked the nation. Abraham was saying America would have to choose, either slavery everywhere or freedom everywhere. Abraham lost the Senate race, but something amazing happened. His debates with Douglas made him famous nationwide. People began talking about this tall, honest lawyer from Illinois who spoke so clearly about right and wrong. Chapter 5: The Unlikely President. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln decided to run for president. Most people thought he had no chance. He was competing against much more experienced politicians. But Abraham had advantages others didn't recognize. First, he was from the West, which was becoming more important. Second, he had a reputation for honesty that other politicians lacked. Third, his position on slavery appealed to Northern voters tired of compromising with the South. Abraham's campaign was unique. Instead of promising different things to different people, he spoke consistently about his core beliefs: America should be a place where anyone could succeed through hard work, and slavery was morally wrong and shouldn't expand. When election day came, Abraham won, but barely. He received less than 40% of the popular vote. More importantly, he didn't receive a single vote in most Southern states. Many Southerners saw his election as a declaration of war. Before Abraham could take office, Southern states began leaving the Union. South Carolina left first, followed by 6 others. They formed the Confederate States of America with their own president, Jefferson Davis. Abraham faced an impossible situation. If he let Southern states leave peacefully, the United States would cease to exist. But if he forced them to stay, it would mean war. Chapter 6: The Weight of Leadership. On March 4, 1861, Abraham Lincoln became the 16th president. But what kind of country was he leading? 7 states had left the Union, and more threatened to follow. The remaining states were deeply divided. Abraham's inauguration speech tried to prevent war while maintaining the Union must be preserved. "We are not enemies, but friends," he told the nation. But Confederate forces were already surrounding Fort Sumter, a federal military base in South Carolina. Abraham spent sleepless nights trying to find peaceful solutions. He sent messages to Confederate leaders, offering compromises. But the Confederate government had decided peaceful coexistence was impossible. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. Abraham realized his worst fears had come true: Americans would be killing Americans. But he knew that if the Union fell apart, democracy itself might die. Abraham's first challenge was building an army. The United States had a tiny military, and many of the best officers had joined the Confederacy. Abraham had to find generals, recruit soldiers, and organize a war effort while running the government. Making things worse, Abraham had almost no military experience. His only time as a soldier was brief service in a local militia, and he never saw fighting. Now he was commanding armies and making life-or-death decisions affecting hundreds of thousands. The early months were disasters for the Union. Confederate forces won battle after battle, and Abraham's generals seemed confused. Northern newspapers called Abraham incompetent. Abraham later said these were the darkest days of his life. Chapter 7, The Emancipation Decision. As 1861 turned into 1862, the Civil War became much worse than expected. Both sides thought the war would last months. Instead, battles were becoming bloodier with new weapons that killed more people faster. Abraham faced criticism from every direction. Northern Democrats said he was fighting an unnecessary war. Radical Republicans said he wasn't fighting hard enough and should immediately free all enslaved people. Military leaders complained he interfered too much. Personal tragedy struck in February 1862 when their son Willie died of typhoid fever. Abraham and Mary were devastated. Mary became so depressed she couldn't function, leaving Abraham to grieve alone while running the country and fighting a war. Abraham found comfort in reading the Bible and thinking about the war's meaning. He began believing perhaps God was using this conflict to end slavery. If so, then all the suffering might have a greater purpose. By mid-1862, Abraham decided to issue a proclamation freeing enslaved people in rebelling states. His advisors were terrified. "This will make the war longer and bloodier," they warned. "The South will fight harder, and you might lose Northern support." Abraham understood the risks, but believed it was right. However, he was shrewd politically. He decided to wait for a Union military victory so it wouldn't look like desperation. The victory came in September 1862 at Antietam in Maryland. Union forces stopped a Confederate invasion, though the battle was incredibly bloody. But it was enough victory for Abraham's purposes. On September 22, 1862, Abraham announced the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It stated that on January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in rebelling states would be declared free. The announcement sent shockwaves across America and the world. On January 1, 1863, Abraham signed the final Emancipation Proclamation. His hand was shaking from greeting visitors all morning. "If my hand trembles when I sign, people will say I was hesitant," Abraham said. He steadied his hand and signed clearly and boldly. Chapter 8, Turning the Tide. The Emancipation Proclamation changed everything. No longer was this just a war to preserve the Union, it was now a war for human freedom. This had profound effects both domestically and internationally. In the South, enslaved people began escaping in larger numbers. They had heard about Abraham's proclamation, and word spread quickly through enslaved communities. Thousands made dangerous journeys to Union lines, where they could be free and often joined the Union Army. In the North, the war became more popular among slavery opponents, but less popular among those who didn't want to fight for African American freedom. Abraham faced riots in New York City over military drafts. Internationally, the proclamation prevented European countries from supporting the Confederacy. Britain and France had been considering recognizing Confederate independence, but couldn't support a nation fighting to preserve slavery. Meanwhile, Abraham continued searching for military leaders who could win. He went through several commanding generals, each disappointing him differently. Finally, in early 1864, Abraham found his general, Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was different. He was willing to fight aggressively, didn't make excuses, and understood that Union advantages in population and industry meant they could win a long war if they had the will. But Grant's strategy meant enormous casualties. In 6 weeks during spring 1864, the Union Army lost over 60,000 soldiers. Northern newspapers called Grant the Butcher and blamed Abraham. Abraham was tormented by the death toll but believed ending the war quickly would ultimately save more lives. Chapter 9, The 1864 Election Crisis. As 1864 progressed, Abraham faced not only war against the Confederacy but also political war for his survival. The 1864 presidential election was approaching, and many in his own party wanted to replace him. The criticism was brutal. Northern Democrats nominated General George McClellan, Abraham's former commanding general, who promised to negotiate peace with the Confederacy. Many war-weary Northerners were attracted to ending the fighting, even if it meant Confederate independence. Abraham's own party was split. Radical Republicans thought he was too moderate. Conservative Republicans thought he had gone too far with emancipation. Some Republicans nominated John C. Fremont to run against Abraham. The military situation made everything worse. Despite Grant's tactics, the war seemed endless. Confederate General Robert E. Lee continued inflicting heavy casualties. By summer 1864, many Northerners were convinced the war was unwinnable. Abraham began doubting he could win re-election. In August 1864, he wrote privately, "This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected." Then everything changed. In September 1864, Union General William T. Sherman captured Atlanta, Georgia, one of the most important Confederate cities. The victory proved the Union could still win decisive battles. Sherman's victory transformed the election. Northern voters who had been ready to give up suddenly felt hopeful. Abraham won re-election decisively, carrying all but 3 states. In his second inaugural address on March 4, 1865, Abraham gave one of history's greatest speeches. Instead of celebrating victory, he called for healing. "With malice toward none, with charity for all," he said, "let us bind up the nation's wounds." Chapter 10, Victory and Assassination. By April 1865, Confederate resistance was collapsing. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The Civil War was effectively over. Abraham was jubilant but exhausted. He had aged dramatically. Photographs show a man who looked decades older than his 56 years. The stress of leading the country through its greatest crisis had taken an enormous toll. Abraham began planning for what came next. How do you rebuild a country torn apart by war? How do you integrate millions of newly freed people? How do you heal the hatred and bitterness? Abraham believed reconciliation was possible. He wanted to be generous to the defeated South, not vindictive. "We must not seek revenge," he told advisers. "We must welcome our Southern brothers back with open arms." On April 14, 1865, Abraham and Mary attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. It was a comedy called Our American Cousin, and Abraham was looking forward to relaxation after years of constant stress. But in the audience was John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and Confederate sympathizer. Booth was furious that the Confederacy had lost and blamed Abraham personally. He had been planning to assassinate the president for weeks. During the third act, when the audience was laughing loudly, Booth crept into Abraham's box. He pulled out a small pistol and shot Abraham in the back of the head. "Sic semper tyrannis," Booth shouted, "thus always to tyrants." He jumped onto the stage, breaking his leg, but escaped on horseback. Abraham was carried to a boarding house across the street. Doctors worked desperately to save him, but the bullet had caused too much brain damage. Mary sat by his bedside, holding his hand and crying. At 7:22 on the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. He was 56 years old. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton spoke the words that would be remembered forever, "Now he belongs to the ages." Chapter 11, The Eternal Legacy. The news of Abraham's assassination spread like wildfire. Throughout the North, people wept openly in the streets. Even many who had criticized Abraham now realized what the country had lost. Abraham's funeral train traveled from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, stopping in major cities. Millions lined the railroad tracks to pay respects. In many towns, entire populations turned out. African Americans, many recently freed, stood with tears streaming, knowing Abraham had died for their freedom. But Abraham's death created new problems. His successor, Andrew Johnson, lacked Abraham's political skills and moral authority. The period after the war, known as Reconstruction, became a time of missed opportunities and growing racial tensions. Abraham's impact extends far beyond American history. His ideas about democracy, equality, and human dignity have inspired freedom movements worldwide. During World War II, Winston Churchill drew strength from Abraham's example. Civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. saw Abraham as a model for fighting injustice through moral leadership. Abraham's rise from poverty to the presidency has become the ultimate American success story. He proved that in America, it doesn't matter where you come from, with hard work, honesty, and determination, you can achieve anything. But perhaps Abraham's greatest legacy is demonstrating that democracy can survive its worst crisis. When the United States seemed ready to fall apart forever, Abraham's leadership held it together. He showed that democratic governments, despite their flaws, can find strength to do what is right. Conclusion: the man who saved America. What made Abraham Lincoln so special? How did a poor farm boy become one of history's greatest leaders? The answer lies in a combination of characteristics that made him uniquely suited for his time. First, Abraham had an incredible ability to connect with ordinary people. Despite becoming president, he never forgot what it was like to be poor, to work with his hands, or to worry about money. When he spoke to farmers or laborers, they felt he understood their struggles. Second, Abraham was a master of language. He could take complex political and moral issues and explain them simply. His speeches are still studied today because they combine profound ideas with beautiful, clear writing. Third, Abraham had emotional intelligence. He could read people's feelings and motivations, and knew how to appeal to their better angels. Even when disagreeing with someone, he tried to understand their perspective and find common ground. Abraham was also incredibly resilient. Throughout his life, he faced failure, criticism, personal tragedy, and enormous pressure. But he never gave up. When one approach didn't work, he tried another. This mental toughness served him well during the Civil War's darkest days. Most importantly, Abraham had a clear moral compass. He believed deeply in right and wrong, and was willing to sacrifice his political career and life for his principles. In an age when many politicians were opportunists, Abraham stood firm in his belief that slavery was wrong and the Union must be preserved. Abraham Lincoln's story offers timeless lessons relevant today. In our own time of division, his example shows that real leadership often requires taking unpopular positions, that democracy requires compromise and patience, that personal character matters in leadership, that perseverance can overcome enormous obstacles, and that one person really can change the world. Abraham Lincoln died more than 150 years ago, but his influence continues today. The United States that exists now, where people of all races can become citizens, where democracy is the foundation, where individual freedom is protected, exists largely because of decisions Abraham made during America's darkest period. When you face challenges in your own life, remember Abraham Lincoln. Remember the boy who walked miles to borrow a book, the young man who taught himself law by candlelight, the politician who chose principle over popularity, and the president who saved his country by nearly sacrificing everything. This has been the incredible journey of Abraham Lincoln, the man who rose from a log cabin to the White House, who split a nation to save it, and who gave his life so others could be free. His legacy lives on in every person who chooses courage over fear, truth over lies, and unity over division.